The gunshot that shattered the window of Morrison's general store missed Amelia Vance by 3 inches, and she didn't even flinch. The other customers screamed and dove for cover, but Amelia simply stepped to the side, gathered the flour sacks she'd been examining, and walked calmly to the counter to pay. Her hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. When you'd survived what she had, a stray bullet from some drunk cowboy's pistol was hardly worth a reaction. "Miss Vance, are you all right?" Mr. Morrison stammered from behind a barrel of pickles where he'd taken shelter. "I'm fine. I'll take the flour, 2 pounds of coffee, and that bolt of blue cotton." It was April of 1882, and Prescott, Arizona Territory was still rough around the edges, despite being the territorial capital. The town sat in the high desert country where ponderosa pines met scrubland, where the air was thin and clear, and you could see trouble coming from a mile away if you knew how to look. Amelia had learned to look. She'd learned a lot of things in the 5 years since she'd arrived, alone and 20 years old, with nothing but a carpetbag and secrets she intended to take to her grave. She paid for her goods and stepped out into the bright afternoon sunshine. The drunk who'd fired the shot was being hauled away by Marshal Breckenridge, still hollering about someone cheating at cards. Amelia pulled her bonnet forward, making sure the brim shaded her face, and started the walk back to the boarding house where she rented a small room. She kept her sleeves buttoned tight at the wrists despite the warmth of the day. She always did. The boarding house sat on the edge of town, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but was clean and respectable. Mrs. Chen, who ran it, didn't ask questions, which was why Amelia had chosen it. She climbed the stairs to her room, set down her parcels, and moved to the wash basin to splash water on her face. Only then, in the privacy of her locked room, did she unbutton her cuffs and roll up her sleeves. The scars ran from her wrists to her shoulders, a twisted landscape of old burns that had healed badly. The pattern told a story she never spoke aloud, of a fire, of being trapped, of her father who'd been too drunk to hear her screaming, and her mother who died trying to reach her. A neighbor had finally pulled her out, but not before the flames had written their history on her skin. She'd been 17. The scars had cost her more than pain. They'd cost her the man she'd planned to marry, who'd taken one look at her ruined arms and walked away. They'd cost her the pity and whispers of her hometown in Missouri. They'd cost her any chance at the normal life she'd once imagined. So she'd left. She'd come west where nobody knew her, and she'd built a new life, out of careful distance and high collars and sleeves that never came unbuttoned in public. She worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and making dresses for the respectable women of Prescott. She was good with her needle despite her scars, maybe because of them. Her hands had learned precision in their healing. She was rolling her sleeves back down when she heard the commotion outside. Hoofbeats, many of them, and men's voices raised in greeting. She moved to the window and looked down into the street. A group of cowboys had just ridden in, trail dusty and tired, their horses plodding with the exhaustion of a long drive. She'd seen plenty of such groups. Prescott was a crossroads, a place where cattlemen brought their herds through, on the way to better grazing or to market. One of the riders caught her eye. He sat tall in the saddle despite obvious weariness, and even from her window she could see he was young, maybe her own age of 25. He had dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard, but there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet competence that seemed at odds with his youth. As she watched, he dismounted and helped an older cowboy down, steadying the man who seemed to be favoring his left leg. "Come on, Charlie, let's get you to the doctor," she heard him say, his voice carrying clearly in the late afternoon air. His accent marked him as being from somewhere back east originally, though it had been softened by time spent in the West. She let the curtain fall and turned away. It wasn't her concern. Other people's stories weren't her business, just as she made sure hers wasn't theirs. But fate, or chance, or whatever force governs the seemingly random meetings that change everything, had other ideas. The next morning, Mrs. Chen knocked on her door, just as Amelia was finishing her breakfast of bread and tea. "Miss Vance, I hope you don't mind, but I've taken the liberty of volunteering your services," Mrs. Chen said, her round face apologetic but firm. Mrs. Chen was a woman who made decisions and expected others to follow along. "Those cowboys who came in yesterday, they'll be staying a week while they rest up and resupply. Several of them need mending, and I told their boss you're the finest seamstress in Prescott." Amelia wanted to refuse, but she needed the money. Her savings were growing, but slowly, and she had dreams of perhaps opening her own dress shop one day. Of course, Mrs. Chen. Have them leave the items that need mending. Oh, one of them is coming by this morning to discuss it. Apparently he needs quite a bit done, and he wants to make sure you have time. A Mr. Kade Zimmerman, very polite young man. The name meant nothing to Amelia, but she nodded and cleared away her breakfast things. She changed into one of her better day dresses, a gray cotton with long sleeves and a high collar, and pinned her dark brown hair up severely. She looked at herself in the small mirror and saw what she always saw, a woman who'd learned to make herself unremarkable, to draw no attention, to invite no questions. The knock came at 10 o'clock. Mrs. Chen's voice drifted up from downstairs, and then footsteps on the stairs. Amelia opened her door at the knock to find the cowboy she'd noticed the day before, standing in the hallway, hat in hand. Up close, she could see his eyes were a startling blue-gray, and though he looked tired, there was kindness in his face. "Miss Vance, I'm Kade Zimmerman. Mrs. Chen said you might be able to help with some mending and maybe a new shirt or two if you have time. Come in, Mr. Zimmerman. I can certainly look at what you need." She stepped back, and he entered the room somewhat hesitantly. It wasn't proper, strictly speaking, for a man to be in her room, but she'd left the door open, and this was business. She'd learned that propriety was a luxury she couldn't always afford. He carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper, which he set on the small table by the window. "I apologize for the state of these. We've been on the trail for 6 weeks, bringing a herd up from Texas. Things get worn out." She unwrapped the bundle and examined the contents. 2 shirts with torn seams, another with a ripped pocket, a vest that had lost several buttons, and a pair of trousers with a tear in the knee. All were well-made items originally, she noted, not the cheap goods some cowboys wore. "I can have these ready in 3 days. As for new shirts, I'd need to take measurements." "That would be fine, thank you." He paused, then added, "Charlie, that's our oldest hand. He took a bad fall a week ago, bruised his ribs and twisted his knee. He's trying to hide how much it hurts, but I figure he could use a new shirt to cheer him up. Something sturdy but comfortable. Would that be possible?" The thoughtfulness of the request surprised her. Most trail bosses wouldn't think twice about an injured cowhand beyond whether he could still work. "I can do that. I'd need his measurements as well. I can bring him by, if that's all right. He's down at the doctor's office now, getting his knee wrapped properly." They discussed fabric choices and prices, and Amelia found herself relaxing slightly. Kade Zimmerman was easy to talk to, his manner respectful without being falsely charming. He didn't stare at her the way some men did, looking for flaws to comment on or trying to catch her eye for reasons she had no interest in entertaining. He was simply a man who needed mending done, and she was a seamstress who could do it. "I'll bring Charlie by this afternoon if the doctor clears him to walk around," Kade said as he prepared to leave. "And thank you, Miss Vance. I appreciate you taking this on with such short notice." "It's my work, Mr. Zimmerman. No thanks necessary." He smiled at that, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his tired face. "Well, I'm grateful anyway." After he left, Amelia sat down with the mending and began to work. Her needle flew through the fabric, making tiny, precise stitches that would hold stronger than the original seams. She'd been working for perhaps an hour when she heard voices downstairs again, and then Mrs. Chen was at her door. "Miss Vance, that Mr. Zimmerman is back with his friend." She set aside her work and found 2 men waiting in the hallway. Kade stood beside an older cowboy, perhaps 50, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the sun. He was leaning heavily on a walking stick, and she could see the pain and the tightness around his eyes. "Miss Vance, this is Charlie Dexter. Charlie, Miss Vance has kindly agreed to make you a new shirt." "That's mighty kind of you, miss," Charlie said, his voice rough but genuine. "Kade here says I'm too ugly to keep wearing rags, though I told him I've been ugly and wearing rags for years now without complaint." Amelia found herself almost smiling. "Well, we can't do anything about the first part, Mr. Dexter, but we can certainly address the second. If you'll come in, I'll take your measurements." She'd done this hundreds of times, measuring men for shirts and vests, and she'd developed a quick, efficient method that involved minimal contact. She had her measuring tape and her notebook, and she could usually get all the numbers she needed in under 5 minutes. But Charlie's injury made it difficult for him to stand still, and he kept trying to suppress winces of pain. "Mr. Dexter, perhaps you should sit down," she said after he swayed for the 3rd time. "I'm fine, miss, just a little sore. "Charlie, sit down before you fall down," Kade said, his voice firm but not unkind. He guided the older man to the room's single chair. "We've got time." "You're making a fuss over nothing," Charlie grumbled, but he sank into the chair with obvious relief. Amelia knelt to measure the inseam for sleeve length, her hands working quickly. But as she reached up to measure across Charlie's shoulders, he shifted suddenly, trying to accommodate her, and his hand knocked against the button at her right wrist. It popped free, and before she could react, her sleeve slid up several inches, exposing the scarred skin of her forearm. She jerked her hand back and turned away, fumbling to rebutton the cuff. Her face burned with humiliation. No one saw the scars. No one. That was the rule she'd lived by for 5 years. "I'm sorry, miss. I didn't mean to," Charlie was saying, but his voice seemed to come from far away through the rushing in her ears. "It's fine," she managed, keeping her back turned until she had the sleeve secured again. "I have enough measurements. If you'll excuse me, I need to check my fabric stores." "Miss Vance?" Kade's voice was quiet but insistent. She didn't turn around. She couldn't look at their faces and see what she knew would be there. Pity, disgust, morbid curiosity. She'd seen all those reactions before. "Please leave the items that need mending. I'll have everything ready in 3 days as promised." There was a long moment of silence. Then she heard movement, the scrape of the chair as Charlie stood, the sound of boots on the wooden floor. But instead of going to the door, the footsteps came closer. She tensed, her hands gripping the edge of her sewing table. "Miss Vance?" Kade's voice was right behind her now. "Would you look at me, please?" "Mr. Zimmerman, I have work to do." "I know, and I'm a paying customer, so I figure I've got the right to say something before I go." There was a pause, and then he said very gently, "I have scars too, from barbed wire, 3 years ago. Tore up my back pretty bad when a horse threw me into a fence. They're not pretty to look at, but they're a part of my story. Whatever gave you your scars, whatever story they tell, it doesn't make you less. It makes you someone who survived something." She squeezed her eyes shut. "You don't understand. Maybe not, but I know this. Scars are proof we're still here, and from where I'm standing, that makes you pretty remarkable." "You didn't even see them properly," she said, and immediately regretted it. Why was she arguing with him? Why wasn't she just staying silent until he left? "Didn't need to see them properly? I saw enough to know you've been through something hard, and I saw the way you tried to hide, like you think they make you less than what you are. But, Miss Vance, whatever those scars are, they don't change the fact that you're a skilled seamstress who's kind enough to help out some trail-worn cowboys. They don't change the fact that you have gentle hands and a steady voice, and they sure as hell don't make you anything less than beautiful." The word hit her like a physical blow. Beautiful. No one had called her beautiful since before the fire. No one had even hinted at it. She'd learned to think of herself as permanently marked, damaged, someone who'd given up any right to such words. "You don't have to say that," she whispered. "I don't say things I don't mean. It's a failing of mine, according to most folks. I'm too blunt for polite society." There was a hint of humor in his voice now. "But I mean it, Miss Vance. Whatever you think those scars make you, they don't make you less beautiful. They just make you you." She heard Charlie clear his throat. "The boy's right, miss. And if it helps any, I've got a burn scar on my leg from a campfire mishap 10 years back. Looks like someone melted a candle on my shin. My wife says it's hideous, but she loves me anyway. Scars are just part of living." Slowly, Amelia turned around. Both men were looking at her, and she braced herself for what she'd see in their faces. But there was no pity in Kade's blue-gray eyes, no disgust in Charlie's weathered face. There was only kindness and a sort of matter-of-fact acceptance that shook something loose in her chest. "I was in a fire," she heard herself say. "When I was 17, my arms and shoulders, they healed badly." "I'm sorry that happened to you," Kade said simply. "It must have been terrifying." It was the right thing to say, the only thing to say, really. Not a comment on how the scars looked, not a platitude about how it could have been worse, not a religious sentiment about God's plan. Just acknowledgement that something bad had happened, and it must have been hard. Amelia felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 5 years begin to loosen, just a fraction. It was a long time ago. "Time helps, but it doesn't erase everything, does it?" Kade said. "The barbed wire was 3 years ago for me, and I still don't like having my back against a fence." Charlie nodded. I still won't sleep near a campfire after my burn. Make the boys laugh, but I don't care. Some things stay with you." They stood there in her small room, three people marked by different misfortunes, and Amelia felt less alone than she had in years. It was strange and unsettling, and oddly comforting all at once. "I should let you get back to work," Kade said finally. "We've taken up enough of your time, but Miss Vance, I meant what I said. And if you'd be willing, I'd like to commission that new shirt for Charlie and maybe two for myself. I trust your skill." "I'll have them ready," she said. Her voice was steadier now. After they left, she sat back down at her sewing table, but she didn't pick up her needle right away. Instead, she rolled up her right sleeve and looked at her scars in the daylight. The twisted skin, the discoloration, the way the pattern swirled up her arm like some terrible map. She'd spent so long hiding them, so long believing they made her unworthy of being seen. But Kade Zimmerman had seen them and called her beautiful anyway. She didn't quite believe him. How could she? But the fact that he'd said it, that he'd meant it based on the sincerity in his voice, that was something. That was more than she'd had yesterday. She picked up her needle and went back to work. Over the next 3 days, Amelia threw herself into the mending and the new shirts. She worked late into the evening by lamplight, determined that everything would be perfect. The new shirts she made from sturdy cotton in a deep blue for Charlie and lighter blue and tan for Kade. She reinforced the seams, added extra buttons, made sure every stitch was flawless. She told herself it was just professional pride. She told herself it had nothing to do with the cowboy with blue-gray eyes who'd called her beautiful. But she was lying, and she knew it. On the third day, as promised, there was a knock at her door in the late afternoon. She opened it to find Kade standing there, cleaned up now, freshly shaved with his hair cut, and wearing clothes that didn't look like they'd survived a trail drive. He looked younger without the beard, and she could see the angles of his face more clearly, the strong jaw and the slight cleft in his chin. "Miss Vance, I've come to collect the mending and the new shirts if they're ready." "They are. Come in." She'd wrapped everything in clean brown paper, tied with string. As he examined the mending, checking the seams, she found herself holding her breath. His opinion shouldn't matter so much, but it did. "This is excellent work," he said finally. "Better than the original seams, I think. And these shirts are perfect." He held up the blue one she'd made for Charlie. "He's going to be thrilled. He's been complaining about his wardrobe for the entire time I've known him, but he never wants to spend money on himself. I'm glad you're satisfied." He paid her, counting out the coins carefully, and she noticed his hands were scarred too, a road map of nicks and cuts and old rope burns. Working hands, like hers. "Miss Vance, I was wondering if I could ask you something, and I hope you won't think I'm being forward." Her stomach tightened. "What is it?" "There's a dance at the town hall tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just the locals and some of us who are passing through. Would you consider coming? Charlie's been invited by Mrs. Chen, of all people, and he's terrified to go alone. I thought if there were a few friendly faces there, it might help." It wasn't quite an invitation to accompany him, she noticed. It was an invitation to attend the same event, carefully worded to give her an escape route if she wanted it. She should refuse. She'd avoided dances and social gatherings since coming to Prescott, but something in her, the same something that had loosened when he'd called her beautiful, wanted to say yes. "I don't dance," she said. "That's fine. Neither does Charlie, especially with his knee. We can all stand around looking awkward together." He smiled. "Please consider it. I'd like to see you there." After he left, Amelia stood in her room and looked at the coins on her table. Then she looked at her wardrobe, at the sensible dresses in gray and brown and dark blue. Nothing suitable for a dance, but she had fabric, and she had skill, and she had the rest of the day and all of the evening. She'd come west to hide, to build a life where no one could hurt her again. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding quite so thoroughly. She chose a fabric she'd bought months ago on impulse and never used, a soft cotton in a warm rose color. The style she decided on had long sleeves, of course, but she cut them to button at the wrist with mother-of-pearl buttons she'd been saving. The neckline was modest but not severe, and she added a touch of lace at the collar. As she worked through the night, she let herself imagine wearing it. Imagine walking into the town hall and seeing Kade's face when he saw her. It was foolish. It was hopeful. It was terrifying. She did it anyway. The next evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky orange and gold, Amelia put on the new dress. She arranged her hair differently, softer, with a few curls framing her face. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked younger, more alive. She looked like someone who might believe she could be called beautiful. The walk to the town hall seemed both too short and too long. She could hear the music from a block away, fiddles and a guitar, and the sound of laughter and voices. Her hands were shaking as she climbed the steps to the entrance. She could still turn back. No one would know she'd almost been brave enough. But then the door opened, and Mrs. Chen was there, beaming. "Miss Vance, how lovely you look! Come in, come in. Charlie and Mr. Zimmerman are already here. Charlie's been telling me the most wonderful stories about trail drives." Before Amelia could respond, she was being ushered inside, into the warm, crowded hall where it seemed like half of Prescott had gathered. There were families, couples, groups of young people, and yes, there were the cowboys from Kade's crew, cleaned up and looking slightly uncomfortable in their best clothes. And there was Kade, standing near the refreshment table with Charlie, and when he saw her, his entire face lit up. He said something to Charlie and started making his way through the crowd toward her. "Miss Vance," he said when he reached her, and his voice was warm with something that might have been wonder. "You came, and that dress is beautiful. Did you make it?" "Yesterday, after you left." "You made that in a day? That's incredible." He was staring at her, and she felt her cheeks warm. "I'm really glad you came." "I'm not sure why I did," she admitted. "Because you wanted to. That's reason enough." He offered his arm. "Can I get you some punch? I have to warn you, it's probably terrible. Town dances always have terrible punch." She took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him, even through the fabric of his shirt and her sleeve. "I'll risk it." The punch was indeed terrible, far too sweet and tasting vaguely of questionable fruit. But standing beside Kade, watching Charlie try to teach Mrs. Chen some complicated dance step despite his bad knee, watching the townspeople swirl and laugh, Amelia felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she belonged somewhere. "You want to know something?" Kade said quietly, leaning closer so she could hear him over the music. "I was worried you wouldn't come. I'm not good at this sort of thing, asking women to dances, even in the roundabout way I did. Usually I put my boot in my mouth within the first 5 minutes of conversation. You've been perfectly polite. Give me time, the night's young." He grinned at her. "But seriously, I'm glad you're here. This week in Prescott has been the first time in months I've felt like I was somewhere instead of just passing through. And I think that's partly because I met you." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stood there side by side, watching the dancers. After a while, Kade said, "I know you said you don't dance, but would you take a walk with me? It's getting stuffy in here, and I could use some air." They stepped out into the cool evening. The sky was fully dark now, scattered with more stars than Amelia had ever seen back in Missouri. The music from the hall was softer out here, drifting on the breeze. "How long have you been in Prescott?" Kade asked as they walked slowly down the street. 5 years. I came here when I was 20. From Missouri, if I'm guessing right by your accent. You're perceptive. Part of the job. You've got to read people and situations when you're working with cattle and cowboys. One missed sign can mean the difference between a successful drive and a disaster. He paused. "Can I ask what made you choose Arizona Territory? It's a long way from Missouri." "That was the point," she said quietly. "I wanted to be far away from everything I knew. Because of the fire. Because of what happened after. Because of how people looked at me, talked about me. Because the man I was supposed to marry took one look at my arms and said he couldn't bear to see them for the rest of his life." The words came out bitter, even after all these years. Kade stopped walking. In the darkness, she could just make out his expression, and it was furious. "He said that to you? What kind of man would say something like that? The kind who thought he was being honest. He said it would be wrong to marry me when he felt that way, that I deserved someone who could accept me as I was." She laughed, a hollow sound. "As if such a person existed. They do exist. I'm looking at you right now, and all I see is a beautiful woman in a rose-colored dress who's the finest seamstress I've met and who's brave enough to survive a fire and start over somewhere new. Your scars are part of you, but they're not all of you. Anyone who can't see that is a fool. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you kept working even when a bullet came through the store window. I know you made Charlie a shirt not because you had to, but because it was a kind thing to do. I know you made yourself a dress in one day because you wanted to come to a dance, even though it scared you. That tells me plenty. They'd stopped in front of a small park, really just a square of grass, with a few trees and some benches. Kade gestured to one of the benches. "Can we sit for a minute?" They sat, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Kade said, "I need to tell you something. My crew and I, we're leaving in 4 days. We've got to get to northern Arizona territory to pick up another herd. It's what we do, contract droving. We go where the work is." Amelia's stomach sank. She'd known, of course. Cowboys didn't stay. They were always moving, always chasing the next job, the next herd. But hearing it stated so plainly hurt more than she'd expected. "I understand. I don't think you do. See, I've been doing this for 5 years, ever since I left Kansas. I've seen a lot of towns, met a lot of people, and I've never met anyone who made me think about staying somewhere. Until now." She turned to look at him, her heart beating faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've got 4 days before I leave, and I'd like to spend as much of that time as possible getting to know you better. And I'm saying that maybe, when this next job is done, I could come back to Prescott, if you wanted me to." "Why would you do that?" "Because in 3 days, I've learned that you're someone worth coming back for. Because when I saw your scars, my first thought wasn't about what they looked like, but about how much pain you must have endured. Because when you walked into that town hall tonight, you were the most beautiful woman there. And I don't think you even realize it." Amelia's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. "Kade, you don't have to say these things." "Yes, I do. Because I think you've spent 5 years believing you're not worthy of them, and that's wrong. It's a lie you've been telling yourself, or that someone else told you and you believed. And I want you to hear the truth for once." "What truth?" "That you're beautiful, that your scars don't define you, that you deserve someone who sees you for who you really are, not just what happened to you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "I see you, Amelia, and I think you're extraordinary." The tears fell then, and she couldn't stop them. She'd cried alone in her room many times over the years, silent tears of frustration and loneliness. But these were different. These were tears of something breaking open inside her, some tight knot of pain finally beginning to loosen. Kade didn't tell her not to cry. He didn't try to fix it or make it stop. He just held her hand and waited, and when she finally looked up, he offered her his handkerchief. "Sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry." "You didn't. I mean, you did, but not in a bad way." She wiped her eyes, tried to compose herself. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me take you to breakfast tomorrow. There's a place Charlie was telling me about that makes the best biscuits in the territory. Say you'll give me these 4 days to prove I'm serious. And then you'll leave. And then I'll finish my job and I'll come back. It might be 2 months, maybe 3. But I'll come back, Amelia, if you want me to." She looked at him in the starlight, this cowboy with blue-gray eyes who'd seen her scars and called her beautiful, who'd spoken truth to the lies she'd been carrying. She was terrified. She was hopeful. She was both at once. "I want you to." His smile was like sunrise. "Then it's settled. Breakfast tomorrow, and then we'll figure out the rest." They sat there for a while longer, hands clasped, talking quietly about small things. He told her about growing up in Kansas, about how his father had been a farmer who'd lost everything to drought and grasshoppers, about how he'd gone west at 18 to find work and had discovered he was good with cattle and horses, about Charlie, who'd taught him everything he knew and had become like a father to him, about the rest of his crew, 6 good men who worked hard and didn't ask for trouble. She told him about Missouri, about her parents and the fire, about coming to Prescott and building her life here, about her dream of opening a dress shop, about Mrs. Chen and the quiet rhythms of her days, about the loneliness she'd learned to carry like a familiar weight. "You won't have to be lonely anymore," Kade said. "Not if I have anything to say about it." "You can't promise that. You'll be gone more than you're here. For now, but that's not forever. I've got some money saved. I've been doing this work long enough to build up a stake. Eventually, I want to have my own ranch, my own herd. Somewhere I can stay put." He squeezed her hand. "Maybe somewhere around Prescott." That's a big change to consider based on knowing someone for 3 days. I've made bigger decisions on less information. Like the time I agreed to help drive 2,000 head of cattle through Indian Territory during a drought. That was a terrible idea, but we survived it. This feels like a much better gamble. Despite everything, she laughed. You're comparing courting me to a cattle drive? I'm comparing both to calculated risks, and this one I'm willing to take. When they finally walked back to the boarding house, it was late and the dance was ending. People were streaming out of the town hall, and Amelia saw Mrs. Chen with Charlie, the two of them talking animatedly. Charlie caught sight of them and waved. There you two are! Mrs. Chen's been telling me about her late husband. He was a merchant, came over from China in the 50s. Fascinating story. Mrs.? Chen beamed. And Charlie has been telling me about Montana Territory. I've never been farther north than Flagstaff. We should let these ladies get their rest, Kade said, though he seemed reluctant to let go of Amelia's hand. Charlie, can you manage the walk back to the hotel? I'm not an invalid, boy. My knee's fine as long as I don't try dancing, which Mrs. Chen was very understanding about. Charlie tipped his hat to both women. Ladies, it's been a pleasure. At the door to the boarding house, Kade finally released Amelia's hand. Breakfast tomorrow? I'll come by at 8 if that's not too early. 8 is fine? Good. He looked like he wanted to say more, or maybe do more, but they were standing in the street with Mrs. Chen and Charlie watching, so he just tipped his hat and smiled. Sleep well, Amelia. She lay awake for a long time that night, her mind spinning. This was happening too fast. She'd spent 5 years building walls around herself, and Kade Zimmerman had walked through them in less than a week. It was reckless. It was foolish. It was everything she'd told herself she couldn't have. But when she finally slept, she dreamed of Kansas and Arizona, of stars and open spaces, of blue-gray eyes, and a voice calling her beautiful. Breakfast was indeed at a small restaurant that served biscuits that melted in your mouth and gravy that made Amelia close her eyes in appreciation. Kade told her stories about trail drives, about the time they'd been caught in a flash flood and had to swim the herd across a river that hadn't existed the day before, about the night a mountain lion had spooked the cattle and they'd had to ride in darkness to turn the stampede, about the sheer tedium of watching over sleeping cattle under the stars, and how sometimes that tedium was the most peaceful thing in the world. It sounds dangerous, Amelia said. It can be, but it's also beautiful. There's something about being out there with nothing but the land and the sky and the herd. It makes you feel small, but in a good way. Like your problems aren't as big as they seem when you're surrounded by walls. After breakfast, they walked through Prescott, and Kade asked about her life here. She showed him the dress shop where she sometimes worked when they needed extra help. She introduced him to Mr. Morrison at the general store, who raised his eyebrows to see her with a man but said nothing. They walked to the edge of town, where you could see for miles, rolling high desert country dotted with juniper and pine. I can see why you stayed here, Kade said. It's good country. It's far from where I was. That was what mattered. And now, does it still matter in the same way? She thought about that. I don't know. I've spent so long running from the past that I'm not sure I know how to do anything else. You're not running right now. You're here with me, letting me get to know you. That's not running. That's brave. They spent the afternoon at the boarding house, sitting in the small parlor, where it was proper and respectable. Mrs. Chen brought them tea and cookies and beamed at them like a matchmaking fairy godmother. Kade asked about her sewing, and she found herself showing him some of her work, dresses she'd made for customers, the intricate embroidery she sometimes did. He listened like it mattered, like her work was important and interesting. You should open that dress shop, he said. You're talented enough, you could make a real success of it. It takes money to start a business. I'm saving, but slowly. How much would you need? She told him the figure she'd calculated, what it would cost to rent a small storefront, buy fabric and supplies, maybe hire an assistant eventually. It was a substantial sum, years of saving at her current rate. Kade was quiet for a moment, then said, I could help with that. No, she said immediately. I couldn't take your money. Why not? If we're courting, if we're thinking about a future together, why wouldn't I invest in your dream? Because we've known each other for 4 days. Because you might change your mind when you've been gone for a month and you realize you don't really know me. Because I can't be in debt to you like that. It wouldn't be a debt. It would be a gift. Which is worse. I don't want charity. It's not charity to help someone you care about achieve their goals. He held up a hand before she could argue more. But I understand. You're independent and you want to do this yourself. I respect that. Just promise me you'll think about it. Not the money, necessarily, but the dream. Don't put it off forever because you're afraid. The next 2 days passed in a blur of moments that Amelia knew she'd remember forever. Kade took her riding on horses borrowed from the livery, and she was surprised to find she enjoyed it, the freedom of moving fast across open ground. They had dinner at a small restaurant where the food was nothing special, but the company made it seem like a feast. They sat in the park and talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories. Charlie joined them sometimes, and Amelia discovered he had a wry sense of humor and a surprising amount of wisdom. "I've known Kade since he was 18 years old and fresh off the farm," Charlie told her over lunch on the third day. "He's always been smart and hardworking, but he's never been particularly interested in settling down. Too much to see, too much to do," he'd say. "But I see how he looks at you, Miss Vance. That boy's thinking about putting down roots." "We barely know each other," Amelia said, but it was becoming a weaker argument even to her own ears. "Sometimes you just know. My wife, I met her at a church social in Texas 30 years ago. We talked for one evening, and I knew I was going to marry her. We've been together ever since, raised 5 children, and I'd do it all over again." He paused. "She died 2 years ago. Fever. It broke my heart, but I wouldn't trade those 30 years for anything. Love is worth the risk, Miss Vance." On the evening of the third day, Kade asked if she'd walk with him again. They returned to the little park where they'd sat that first night after the dance. The stars were just coming out, and the air had the cool clarity that came with the desert evening. "I leave tomorrow morning," Kade said, "early before sunrise. We've got a long ride ahead of us." "I know. I want you to have something." He pulled a small object from his pocket. In the fading light, she could see it was a silver ring, simple and unadorned. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to a woman worth keeping. I want you to have it." "Kade, I can't. It's too much." "It's not a proposal. Not yet, anyway. I know we need more time for that. But it's a promise that I'm coming back, that I'm serious about you, about us. Wear it and know that someone's out there thinking about you, someone who thinks you're beautiful and brave and worth coming back for." Her hands were shaking as he slipped the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, the silver cool against her skin. "What if you change your mind? What if you realize this was just a moment, not a future? I won't, but if you're worried about that, then let me prove it. I'll write to you from every town we pass through. I'll come back as soon as the job's done. And when I come back, if you still feel the same way, then we'll talk about making this permanent." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle against her cheeks. "I'm falling in love with you, Amelia. I think I started falling the moment you walked into that room, with your careful walls and your hidden scars, trying so hard to be invisible. You're not invisible to me. You never will be." She kissed him then, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his. It was her first kiss in 8 years, since before the fire, since before she'd learned to see herself as damaged, and it felt like coming home and starting a journey all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me." "Good, the best things usually do." They sat in the park until full dark, holding each other, memorizing the feeling of being together. When they finally walked back to the boarding house, they did so slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At her door, Kade kissed her once more, softly. "I'll write as soon as we reach the next town with a post office, and I'll be back before the end of summer, I promise. Be safe, don't take any unnecessary risks." "Yes, madam." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Take care of yourself, Amelia, and think about that dress shop. Think about what you want your life to look like. Because when I come back, I want to be part of that life, if you'll have me." She watched from her window as the sun rose the next morning, watched as Kade and his crew rode out of Prescott heading north. He looked back once, and even from a distance she could feel his gaze finding her window. She pressed her hand against the glass, the silver ring catching the early light. Then they were gone, and she was alone again. Except this time, alone felt different. This time, she was waiting for something, not just hiding from it. The first letter arrived 2 weeks later, postmarked from Flagstaff. Mrs. Chen brought it up to her room with a knowing smile. "That cowboy of yours is a man of his word." Amelia waited until she was alone to open it, her fingers trembling slightly. Dear Amelia, we made it to Flagstaff without incident, which is always a good start to a job. The ranch we're picking up the herd from is about 10 miles north of town, and they've got 500 head ready to move. We'll be taking them to the railroad in Albuquerque, New Mexico territory, which should take about a month if the weather holds and we don't run into trouble. Charlie asks after you. He says to tell you that his new shirt is the finest piece of clothing he's ever owned, and that he's already gotten 2 compliments on it. He's also been insufferable about the fact that he introduced us, even though that's not technically true. But I let him have his moment. I miss you. I know that sounds foolish given that we only knew each other for 4 days, but it's true. I keep thinking about our conversations, about the way you smile when you think no one's watching, about how brave you are even though you don't see it in yourself. I keep thinking about that kiss in the park and how I'd very much like to repeat it when I see you again. The country up here is beautiful, high pine forests and mountains in the distance. But it doesn't compare to Prescott, because you're not here. I'll write again when we reach Albuquerque. Until then, think of me sometimes, and know I'm thinking of you. Yours, Kade. She read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the drawer of her bedside table. Then she sat down at her desk and wrote back, telling him about her days, about the dresses she was working on, about how strange it felt to miss someone she'd known for such a short time. She told him she was thinking about the dress shop, that she'd gone to look at a potential storefront on Cortez Street. She told him she was thinking about him more than was probably wise. She posted the letter the next day and thus began a correspondence that would sustain them through the long weeks apart. The letters came regularly, every week or 10 days, depending on where the crew was and how close they were to a town with a post office. Kade wrote about the work, about the challenges of moving cattle across difficult terrain, about the characters in his crew and the situations they found themselves in. But he also wrote about his thoughts, his dreams, his growing certainty that Prescott was where he wanted to be. Amelia wrote back faithfully, her letters growing longer and more open as time went on. She told him things she'd never told anyone, about the nightmares she still had sometimes about the fire, about the loneliness of the last 5 years, about how his words had changed something in her. She told him she'd started going to church socials, accepting Mrs. Chen's invitations to dinner, letting herself be part of the community she'd held at arm's length for so long. And she told him about the dress shop. She'd gone to the bank, spoken to the manager about a small business loan. To her surprise, with her reputation as a seamstress and her savings as collateral, they'd been willing to work with her. She'd signed the lease on the storefront on Cortez Street. She was going to do it. She was going to open her own shop. Summer deepened into its full heat, the Arizona sun blazing down on Prescott with relentless intensity. Amelia worked on preparing her shop during the cooler morning hours, painting walls, building shelves, ordering fabric and supplies. Mrs. Chen helped, as did several of the women in town who'd been her customers. Word spread that Miss Vance was opening a proper dress shop, and there was excitement about it. "You should have done this years ago," Mrs. Chen said one morning as they hung curtains in the shop's front window. "You've been hiding your light under a bushel, as the saying goes. I wasn't ready before." And what changed? Amelia touched the silver ring on her right hand. She wore it always now, even though it meant questions and knowing looks. "I stopped believing I didn't deserve good things. About time. That cowboy of yours, he did you a favor showing up when he did." "He did," Amelia agreed. Though I'd never tell him that. His head's big enough already based on his letters. She was joking, but Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp. "You love him." It wasn't a question, but Amelia answered anyway. "Yes, I do." "Good. Love is good. You should have more of it in your life." The shop was set to open in mid-August, 2 weeks before Kade had said he'd return. Amelia threw herself into the final preparations, determined everything would be perfect. She'd named it Amelia's Dressmaking, simple and straightforward. The sign had been painted by a local artist, elegant script on a white background. On opening day, she was up before dawn, too nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in one of her best dresses, made sure every pin was in place in her hair, and walked to the shop as the sun was rising. The open sign hung on the door, and when she turned it to face the street, her hands were shaking. The first customer arrived at 9 o'clock, Mrs. Morrison from the general store, wanting a new dress for her daughter's wedding. By noon, Amelia had taken orders for 3 more dresses and had two women browsing the ready-made items she'd sewn in preparation for the opening. By closing time, she was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. This was success. This was what it felt like to build something of her own, to be more than just the woman with scars who did mending in a boarding house room. This was what Kade had encouraged her to reach for. She wished he was there to see it. The next letter came 3 days after the shop opened, and it was different from the others. It was shorter, written quickly. Amelia, we're 3 days out of Prescott. The job finished early because the buyer in Albuquerque was so pleased with the condition of the herd that he bought 200 additional head we picked up along the way. Charlie made a tidy profit on the deal, and so did the rest of us. I'm coming home, not just to visit, but to stay. I've been offered a job as foreman on a ranch just outside Prescott. Steady work with good pay. Charlie's thinking about settling down too, maybe opening a small horse trading business. We're both tired of the trail, ready for something permanent. I should arrive on August 20th, barring any trouble. I know the shop opens soon, and I'm sorry I'll miss the first days. But I'll be there soon, and when I am, I'd like to talk about our future, the one I've been thinking about for 3 months, the one I hope you've been thinking about too. I love you, Amelia. I've been wanting to write those words for weeks now, but they seem too big to put in a letter. But I can't wait anymore. I love you, and I'm coming home to you. Yours always, Kade. She read the letter in the back room of her shop, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time, tears of joy and relief and anticipation. He was coming back. He loved her. He was staying. The next week passed in a blur of work and preparation. The shop continued to do well, with more customers each day. But Amelia's mind was only half on her work. The other half was counting down the days, the hours, until August 20th. When the day finally arrived, she was awake before dawn again, this time for a different reason. She dressed with extra care, choosing the rose-colored dress she'd worn to the dance. She pinned her hair up, then took it down and tried a different style. Nothing looked right. Finally, she settled on something simple, hoping she didn't look as nervous as she felt. The shop opened at 9, and she had 3 customers that morning, but she couldn't focus. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the street. She didn't know exactly when Kade would arrive, only that it would be today. It was just after noon when she saw the riders coming down the street. She recognized Charlie's gray gelding first, then the familiar figure of Kade on his bay horse. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched them dismount in front of the hotel. She should stay in the shop. She had customers to serve, work to do. But her feet were already moving, carrying her out the door and down the street. Kade saw her coming, and his face transformed, that same sunrise smile she remembered from 3 months ago. He started toward her, then they were both running, and then she was in his arms, and he was lifting her off the ground, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You're here," she said when he finally set her down. "You're really here. I told you I'd come back." His hands were cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "God, I missed you. Letters aren't the same as seeing you, hearing your voice. I missed you too. So much." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street, with half of Prescott watching, and she didn't care. Let them watch, let them see. She was done hiding. Charlie cleared his throat behind them. "As touching as this is, you two are blocking traffic, and I'd like to see this dress shop I've been hearing about in letters for weeks." They broke apart, both laughing. Amelia took Kade's hand and led them to the shop, proud to show him what she'd built. He walked through slowly, examining everything, and when he turned to her, his eyes were bright with pride. "It's perfect. You did this, Amelia. This is all you. You helped. You believed I could do it when I wasn't sure I believed it myself. I just saw what was already there." He pulled her close again, seeming unable to stop touching her, as if he needed to confirm she was real. "I have so much to tell you. The job on the ranch, it's good. The owner is a fair man, and he's looking to expand. He's talking about making me a partner eventually, if I prove myself. And there's a piece of land adjacent to the ranch that might be for sale. I was thinking, if things work out, maybe I could buy it, start building something of my own." "That sounds wonderful." "It does, doesn't it? A real future, not just drifting from job to job." He paused, then said, "There's something else? I was going to wait, maybe court you properly for a few more months, but I can't. I've spent 3 months apart from you, and it was 3 months too long. So I'm going to ask you now, Here in your shop, surrounded by fabric and sewing supplies, which probably isn't romantic at all, but it's honest. He took both her hands in his, and she realized he was nervous, this confident cowboy who'd face stampedes and mountain lions. Amelia Vance, I love you. I love your strength and your talent and your bravery. I love the way you've built a life here against all odds. I love that you let me see the parts of you that you hide from everyone else, the scars and the fears and the dreams. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, if you'll let me. Will you marry me? She'd imagined this moment during the long months apart, but the reality was so much better than any imagining. Looking up at Kade, seeing the hope and love in his eyes, she felt the last piece of the wall around her heart crumble away. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. His whoop of joy made her laugh, and then he was kissing her again, and Charlie was saying something about young people these days, and Mrs. Chen, who had apparently followed them from the boarding house, was crying happy tears. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on Montezuma Street. Amelia wore a dress she'd made herself, ivory silk with long sleeves delicately embroidered with flowers. She'd thought about leaving her arms bare, about making a statement that she was no longer hiding, but in the end, she'd chosen to cover them, not because she was ashamed, but because it was what made her comfortable. The scars were part of her story, but they didn't have to be on display for everyone. Kade understood. He'd kissed each of her scarred arms the night before the wedding, gentle and reverent, and told her she was beautiful no matter what she chose to wear. Charlie stood up as Kade's best man, and Mrs. Chen insisted on being Amelia's matron of honor. The church was filled with people from Prescott, customers from the shop, friends Amelia had finally allowed herself to make. As she walked down the aisle toward Kade, she thought about the girl she'd been at 17, trapped in that fire, and the woman she'd become at 20. She thought about the 5 years of hiding and the 4 days that had changed everything. When Kade took her hand and said his vows, his voice steady and sure, she knew she'd found what she'd thought was impossible. Someone who saw all of her, scars and all, and loved her, not despite them, but because they were part of the whole. I promise to love you always, Kade said, to see you as you truly are, beautiful, brave, and absolutely extraordinary. I promise to build a life with you, here in Prescott, that's worthy of everything you've survived. I promise to never make you hide who you are. Her own vows came from the heart. I promise to trust you with my fears and my dreams. I promise to believe you when you call me beautiful, even on the days when I can't see it myself. I promise to build a future with you that honors both our pasts and everything we hope to become. The kiss that sealed their marriage was tender and full of promise, and when they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Amelia felt a joy so complete it almost frightened her. She'd been alone for so long. Now she had a partner, someone to walk beside her through whatever came next. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Amelia danced with her husband, no longer caring that she'd once said she didn't dance. With Kade's arms around her, she felt like she could do anything. Happy? He asked as they swayed to the music. More than I knew was possible. Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of our lives making sure you stay that way. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, the same hotel where Kade had stayed those first days in Prescott. In the privacy of their room, Amelia undressed slowly, removing the beautiful ivory dress and standing before her husband in her chemise. Her arms were bare, the scars visible in the lamplight. Kade's eyes tracked over them, and she fought the urge to cover them. They still bother you, don't they? He said gently. Not because of how they look to me, but because of what they represent. Sometimes, old habits are hard to break. Then we'll break them together. He came to her, took her hands. You're the bravest person I know, Amelia. These scars, they're proof of that. They're proof you survived something terrible and came out the other side. There's beauty in that kind of survival. You always know what to say. Not always, but I try, because you deserve to hear the truth. He kissed her softly. You're beautiful, scars and all. And you're mine, and I'm yours, and that's all that matters. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a claiming and a giving all at once. And when Amelia woke the next morning to find Kade beside her, his arm draped protectively over her waist, she felt a contentment she'd never known. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of Prescott, close enough to town that Amelia could walk to her shop, but far enough out that they had land and privacy. Kade started his work as foreman at the ranch and proved himself so capable that within a year, the owner made good on his promise and offered him a partnership. The piece of land adjacent to the ranch came up for sale, and with their combined savings and a loan from the bank, they bought it. "We're going to build something here," Kade said, as they stood on their land, looking out over rolling high desert country. "Something permanent, a real ranch with cattle and horses and, maybe someday, children running around." "Children," Amelia repeated, the word both thrilling and terrifying. "I'd like that, someday. No rush, we've got time." The dress shop continued to thrive. Amelia hired an assistant, a young woman named Grace, who had a good eye for fashion and a steady hand with a needle. With Grace handling some of the day-to-day work, Amelia had more time to focus on custom designs, the kind of detailed, beautiful work she loved best. She also had more time to spend with Kade, helping him with the ranch when she could, riding out to check on the cattle, learning the rhythms of this new life. She'd never imagined she could be happy on a ranch, but she found she loved the open spaces, the challenge of building something from nothing, the partnership she and Kade had forged. Charlie did indeed open a horse trading business, operating out of a stable on the edge of town. He and Mrs. Chen surprised everyone by announcing their engagement a year after Kade and Amelia's wedding. "Figured I'm too old to be alone," Charlie said gruffly, "and Mrs. Chen makes a good pot of tea." "And he makes me laugh," Mrs. Chen added with a smile. "At my age, that's worth more than romance." Their wedding was smaller than Kade and Amelia's, but no less joyful. Watching Charlie and Mrs. Chen exchange vows, both of them older and scarred by life in their own ways, but willing to take a chance on love anyway, Amelia felt a deep happiness. The people who'd helped her find her way to this new life were finding their own happiness too. Time passed, measured in seasons and small moments. Kade proved himself as a rancher, expanding their herd and building a reputation for quality cattle. Amelia's shop became a fixture in Prescott, the place where ladies came for beautiful dresses and expert alterations. They built a life together, one day at a time, and if some days were hard, and some arguments happened, and some fears resurfaced, they worked through them together. It was 2 years after their wedding, when Amelia realized she was pregnant. She'd been tired and sick in the mornings, and when the pattern continued for 2 weeks, she went to the doctor. The confirmation filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She told Kade that evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." His reaction was everything she'd hoped for. Shock, then a spreading joy that lit up his face. "A baby. We're going to be parents." Then, more seriously, "How do you feel about it? Are you happy?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I pass my fears on to our child?" "You'll be an amazing mother. You're strong and loving, and you've survived more than most people can imagine. Our child will be lucky to have you." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We'll figure it out together, like we figure everything out." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Amelia was sick for the first 4 months, and as her belly grew, she found it harder to work in the shop. Grace stepped up, taking on more responsibility, and Amelia found herself trusting someone else with her business in a way she'd never imagined she could. "You built something that can run without you," Kade said one evening as she fretted about leaving Grace in charge. "That's not a failure, that's success. I know, it's just hard to let go. You're not letting go, you're allowing other people to help. There's a difference." Their son was born in February of 1885, during a cold snap that brought snow to Prescott's high desert. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Amelia was certain she couldn't do it, that this was too much. But Kade stayed with her, holding her hand, telling her she was strong enough, and finally, after 18 hours, their baby boy entered the world with a furious cry. "He's perfect," Kade said, his voice choked with emotion as he held his son for the first time. "Amelia, he's absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Kade's father, with the middle name of Thomas, after Amelia's father, who died in the fire. James Zimmerman came into the world already angry at something, based on his constant crying those first weeks. But as he grew, he became a happy baby with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's determination. Motherhood changed Amelia in ways she hadn't expected. the fierce protectiveness she felt for James, the way her heart seemed to expand to hold this new love, the exhaustion and joy and terror all mixed together, it was overwhelming and wonderful. And watching Kade as a father, seeing him gentle and patient with their tiny son, made her fall in love with him all over again. "I never knew I could be this happy," she told him one night as they watched James sleep in his cradle. "I never thought this would be my life." "It almost wasn't," Kade said quietly. "If I hadn't walked into that boarding house that day, if you hadn't agreed to the mending, if you'd turned down the invitation to the dance, so many small choices that led us here. I'm glad we made the choices we did. So am I. Every single one." When James was 6 months old, Amelia returned to work part-time at the shop. Grace had done so well in her absence that Amelia promoted her to manager, giving her a share of the profits. It was the right decision, and it freed Amelia to spend more time with her family while still keeping her hand in the business she'd built. The ranch continued to grow. Kade and his partner expanded their herd, bought more land, built a reputation as honest dealers. Charlie's horse trading business thrived, and he and Mrs. Chen seemed delighted with their late-in-life marriage. On Sundays, they all gathered for dinner, a makeshift family bound by choice rather than blood. 3 years after James was born, Amelia found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she felt more confident in what was coming. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1888, a sunny morning that seemed to match her temperament. They named her Caroline, and from the moment she arrived, it was clear she was going to be different from her brother. Where James had been fierce and angry, Caroline was calm and observant, watching everything with wide eyes that were the same dark brown as Amelia's. "We make good-looking children," Kade said, holding Caroline while James, now 3 years old, peered at his sister with suspicious curiosity. "We do. Though I'm hoping this is the last one for a while. I'm exhausted." "Fair enough. 2 is a good number." But life had other plans. Another son, William, arrived 2 years later, followed by another daughter, Elizabeth, 3 years after that. By 1893, Kade and Amelia had 4 children, aged 10, 5, 3, and 1, and their house was a constant chaos of noise and activity. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the area, and the dress shop had expanded into a second location in Flagstaff, managed by Grace's sister. Amelia and Kade had built exactly what they had dreamed of, a life rooted in place, surrounded by family, marked by hard work and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kade took Amelia back to the little park where he'd first told her he was falling in love with her. The bench where they'd sat was still there, weathered now but solid. They sat together, holding hands, watching their children play nearby, while Charlie and Mrs. Chen kept an eye on them. "Do you ever regret it?" Amelia asked. "Giving up the trail, settling down so young?" "Never, not once." Kade turned to look at her, his eyes as steady and true as they had been that first day. "You're still the best decision I ever made, Amelia. Seeing you that day with your scars and your strength was like finding something I didn't even know I was looking for." She touched his face, tracing the lines that had appeared over the years, marks of work and worry and laughter. "You changed my life. I was so lost before you, so convinced I didn't deserve good things. You always deserved them. You just needed someone to remind you. Well, you did, every day for 10 years, and I hope for many more to come. Count on it. I'm planning to be around long enough to see our children married with children of their own. I want to be that old cowboy sitting on the porch telling stories about the old days. Then I'll be the old woman sitting beside you, probably still sewing." "Perfect. That sounds absolutely perfect." As the years continued to pass, their family continued to grow in ways beyond just the 4 children. James grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. Caroline proved to have her mother's talent with needle and thread, spending hours at the dress shop learning the trade. William was the adventurer, always climbing trees or chasing after the ranch dogs or getting into mischief. Elizabeth, the baby, was shy and gentle, preferring books to the rough and tumble play of her siblings. Amelia's scars, once the defining feature of her life, became simply part of her. She no longer hid them as carefully, though she still wore long sleeves most of the time out of habit. But on hot summer days, working in the garden or helping with the ranch, she'd roll up her sleeves and not think twice about it. The children knew the story of the fire, told in age-appropriate ways, and they understood that their mother had survived something hard. It made them protective of her, but also proud. Their mother was strong. Their mother had built a successful business and a good life. Their mother's scars were part of what made her who she was. Kade kept his promise to be the old cowboy telling stories. Even as his hair grayed and his face weathered, he never lost his energy or his love of the land. He taught James and William everything he knew about ranching, and he encouraged Caroline and Elizabeth to pursue whatever dreams they had, whether that was taking over the dress shop or something else entirely. Charlie lived to the impressive age of 75 before passing peacefully in his sleep, Mrs. Chen beside him. At his funeral, Kade spoke about the man who'd been like a father to him, who'd taught him everything he knew about cattle and life. Amelia held his hand as he spoke, her own tears falling for the man who'd helped bring them together all those years ago. Mrs. Chen lived another 5 years after Charlie's death, running her boarding house until the very end. When she passed, she left the boarding house to Amelia and Kade, with a note saying that she'd always known that boarding house room would lead to something special. They decided to keep it running, hiring a manager, maintaining it as a place where people passing through could find rest, and maybe, like Amelia once had, a new beginning. By the turn of the century, Prescott had grown from a rough territorial capital into a proper Arizona town. The Zimmerman Ranch was well known, and Amelia's dressmaking had locations in 3 cities. James, now 18, was already taking over more responsibility on the ranch. Caroline, at 15, was designing her own dress patterns, beautiful creations that were becoming sought after. William, at 13, was talking about becoming a veterinarian. And Elizabeth, at 11, had discovered a love of writing and filled notebooks with stories. On a cool evening in October of 1900, Amelia and Kade sat on their porch, watching the sunset. They'd done this thousands of times over the years, but it never got old. The land stretched out before them, their land, built with work and love and stubbornness. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Amelia said, her head resting on Kade's shoulder. "What's that?" "That cowboy who walked into Mrs. Chen's boarding house 18 years ago, looking for someone to do mending. How he saw a scared woman trying to hide her scars and called her beautiful anyway." "Best mending job I ever commissioned," Kade said with a smile. "Got a wife out of it, 4 children, a life I wouldn't trade for anything. I was so certain I knew what my life would be, small, quiet, alone. I thought that was all I deserved. And instead I got everything. A business, a family, a love I didn't know existed. I got you, and that changed everything." "We changed each other," Kade corrected. "You taught me that settling down isn't giving up adventure. It's choosing a different kind. You taught me that strength comes in many forms. You taught me what real beauty looks like." She turned to kiss him. This man who'd loved her for 18 years, who'd seen her scars and called her beautiful, who'd built a life with her that honored both their pasts and their dreams. "I love you, Kade Zimmerman, today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too, Amelia, my beautiful, brave, extraordinary wife." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other against the odds and built something lasting. The scars on Amelia's arms had faded over the years, becoming pale against her sun-weathered skin. They were still there, would always be there, a reminder of where she'd been, but they no longer defined her. She was so much more than her scars now. A wife, a mother, a businesswoman, a friend, a woman who'd learned that survival is its own kind of beauty, and that love can heal even the deepest wounds. In the house behind them, their children were laughing about something, the sound drifting out through the open windows. In the corrals, the horses moved quietly in the gathering dark. In town, the dress shop sat closed for the night, ready to open again tomorrow, and here on the porch, Amelia and Kade sat together, holding hands, surrounded by the life they'd built from 4 days and a promise. She had been a woman with scars she never let anyone see. He had been a cowboy who saw them and called her beautiful. Together, they'd become a love story written across the Arizona territory, a testament to the truth that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen, scars and all. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person who sees you will love you, not despite your scars, but because they're part of the beautiful, complicated, brave person you are. The story could have ended there, on that peaceful porch with the sunset fading and the stars emerging. But life doesn't really end with one perfect moment. It continues day after day, building on itself, creating a tapestry of moments that together make a life well lived. As their children grew into adults, each found their own path. James married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and took over the daily running of the Zimmerman ranch. He had his father's quiet competence and his mother's determination, and under his management, the ranch continued to prosper. He and his wife gave Kade and Amelia their first grandchildren, twin boys who were as wild and energetic as William had been at that age. Caroline shocked everyone by announcing at 18 that she didn't want to just design dresses, she wanted to attend a fashion school back east in New York City. Amelia, remembering her own dreams and how important it had been to have someone believe in them, gave Caroline her blessing and the money for tuition. Caroline spent 3 years in New York, soaking up knowledge and style, before returning to Arizona with new ideas and techniques. The dress shop expanded again under her innovative leadership, becoming known throughout the Southwest for its unique blend of Eastern style and Western practicality. William did become a veterinarian, traveling to San Francisco to attend veterinary college and returning to Prescott to open a practice that served both ranch animals and household pets. He married a teacher from the local school, a practical woman who tolerated his tendency to bring home stray animals with patient good humor. They had 3 children who were as horse crazy as their father. Elizabeth, the shy child, found her voice in her writing. She became a journalist, working for the Prescott newspaper and writing articles about the changing Arizona territory and eventually the new state of Arizona when statehood came in 1912. Her articles about the old days, featuring interviews with pioneers like her own parents, became popular across the territory. She married a fellow journalist, and they had 2 daughters who both inherited the family love of words. Through all of this, Amelia and Kade remained the steady center of their growing family. They slowed down as the years passed. Kade's back bothered him on cold mornings, and Amelia's fingers grew stiff with arthritis, making sewing more difficult. But they adapted, as they'd always adapted, finding new rhythms and new ways to contribute. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, their children threw them a party at the ranch. It seemed like half of Prescott turned out, testament to the community ties they had built over the decades. As Amelia looked around at the crowd, their children and grandchildren, friends and business associates, people whose dresses she'd made and whose cattle Kade had bought and sold, she was overwhelmed with gratitude. "Quite a turnout," Kade said, coming up beside her and slipping his arm around her waist. He was 65 now, his dark hair gone mostly silver, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were the same blue-gray that had first caught her attention in Mrs. Chen's boarding house so many years ago. "It is. I can't believe how much has changed since we met, and how much has stayed the same. I still think you're the most beautiful woman in any room. I still feel lucky every day that you said yes when I asked you to marry me. I still love you more than I can find words for. After 30 years, you'd think you get tired of saying things like that. Never. I'll be saying them when I'm 90, if I'm lucky enough to make it that long." He did make it that long, and beyond. Kade Zimmerman lived to be 93 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until nearly the end. He saw Arizona become a state, saw automobiles replace horses on Prescott's streets, saw his grandchildren have children of their own. He saw the world change in ways he'd never imagined when he was a young cowboy riding in from Texas, looking for mending work. But some things never changed. Until the day he died, peacefully in his sleep in 1920, with Amelia beside him, Kade Zimmerman never stopped calling his wife beautiful. He never stopped seeing past her scars to the strength and courage beneath. He never stopped loving her with the same fierce devotion he'd felt that day in the boarding house when she'd rolled up her sleeve and he'd glimpsed her hidden pain. Amelia lived 5 years longer, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The dress shop had passed to Caroline and her daughters, but Amelia still went in sometimes, offering advice and occasionally picking up a needle to create one more beautiful thing. The ranch was thriving under James and his sons. William's veterinary practice was being taken over by his oldest daughter. Elizabeth's writing had been published in books that sat on library shelves throughout Arizona. On a warm April evening in 1925, 68 years after the fire that had marked her, 43 years after meeting the cowboy who'd changed everything, Amelia Zimmerman passed away in her sleep. She was 82 years old, and she'd lived a life far beyond anything she'd imagined possible in those dark days after the fire. At her funeral, Caroline spoke about her mother's courage, about how she'd built a business from nothing and raised 4 children and loved one man with unwavering devotion. James talked about her strength, about lessons she'd taught not through words but through example. William spoke of her kindness, remembering how she'd always had time for a hurt animal or a child's questions. Elizabeth read from an article she'd written years ago, an interview with her mother about coming west and building a new life. But it was James's oldest son, Amelia, and Kade's first grandchild, now a young man of 25, who told the story that captured the essence of who Amelia had been. He spoke about asking his grandmother once why she always wore long sleeves even on the hottest days. And she told him about the fire, about the scars, about believing for years that they made her less than whole. "But then I met your grandfather," she'd told her grandson, "and he saw the scars and called me beautiful anyway. Not because the scars were beautiful, but because he saw all of me, the scars and everything else, and he loved what he saw. He taught me that surviving something hard doesn't diminish you. It shows you what you're made of, and I learned that the right person will see your scars, whatever they are, and love you not despite them, but because they're a part of your story. The scars I was so ashamed of, they led me to him. They led me to this life. In the end, I'm grateful for them." As the family gathered after the funeral, sharing stories and tears and memories, someone started talking about the boarding house where it had all begun. It was still standing, still operating, still a place where people could find rest. Caroline suggested they put up a plaque, something to mark what had started there. But James shook his head. Mother wouldn't have wanted that. She never wanted to be commemorated or celebrated. She just wanted to live well and love well, and she did both. In the end, there was no plaque, no monument, but the story passed down through the generations, told to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The story of a woman with scars she never let anyone see, and the cowboy who saw them and called her beautiful. The story of 4 days that changed 2 lives and created a family. The story of how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen, and how the right love can heal wounds you thought were permanent. The dress shop continued for another generation before closing in the 1950s, unable to compete with department stores and changing fashions. But pieces from Amelia's designs were kept by the family, passed down as heirlooms. The ranch prospered through the decades, eventually becoming a working cattle ranch that offered tours, educating people about the old ways of the West. Kade and Amelia's house was preserved on the property, maintained by their descendants, a testament to the life they'd built together. And on quiet evenings when the family gathered at the ranch, someone would inevitably tell the story again, about the fire and the scars, about the cowboy who'd needed mending done, about a dance and a promise, about letters written over months of separation, about a marriage built on seeing and being seen, about love that lasted through decades and lives on in the family they created. The story of Amelia Vance and Kade Zimmerman became part of Prescott's history, part of Arizona's history, part of the larger story of the American West, not because they were famous or did anything particularly extraordinary by the world's standards, but because they loved well, built honestly, and proved that sometimes the best stories are the ones about ordinary people who find the courage to be seen and the grace to see others truly. In the end, that's what their story was about. Not really about scars or cowboys or the Wild West, though it contained all those things. It was about the fundamental human need to be seen and accepted, scars and all. It was about the transformative power of love that sees truly and loves anyway. It was about building a life from broken pieces and discovering that the broken places, once healed, are often the strongest. And if you'd asked Amelia in those final years of her life what she wanted people to remember, she might have said this, that she'd been afraid and she'd been brave, that she'd been marked by tragedy and she'd built a triumph, that she'd hidden for years and then she'd let herself be seen, and that when she did, when she finally allowed someone past her walls, she'd found not pity or disgust, but love, real, true, lasting love that saw all of her and cherished every part. The scars were still there, faded but present when she died, but they were no longer the most important thing about her. They were simply part of the story, part of the journey, part of what had led her to Kade and to the life they had built together in the high desert country of Arizona. And really, what more could any story ask for than that? A beginning marked by courage, a middle filled with love and work and family, and an ending that brought peace and satisfaction. A story where the wounded woman and the perceptive cowboy found each other and built something lasting. A story where scars became not marks of shame, but proof of survival, and where being truly seen led not to rejection, but to the deepest kind of acceptance. That was the story of Amelia and Kade. That was the legacy they left. And as long as their descendants gathered to tell the tale, as long as someone remembered that once, in a boarding house in Prescott, Arizona, a cowboy saw a woman's scars and called her beautiful, their story would continue. Not frozen in time, but living and growing and changing with each retelling, each new generation adding their own understanding to the tale. Because in the end, the best love stories aren't about perfect people finding perfect love. They're about wounded people finding the courage to be seen, about kind people choosing to see truly, and about two souls deciding that together they can build something beautiful from the broken pieces they've been given. That was Amelia and Kade's story. That was their truth. And that truth, passed down through generations, remained long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love that sees scars and calls them beautiful, that finds strength in survival, and that builds forever from the foundation of one courageous moment of letting yourself be truly, completely seen.